Back in 5th grade, which is 30 odd years ago now, we took a week-long class trip to a place called Nature's Classroom, and I looked it up. It still exists. There's a couple of locations, but we went to the one in Connecticut. My memory is that we slept in cabins, though honestly, my memory is pretty bad for most of my childhood. There's like snippets, right? So I remember this one counselor who wore pants and a hat like a jester in like bright purple and green. And I remember that the counselor assigned to my group of girls was named Jody and was very kind. And we ate in a mess hall that was kind of like the one at my summer camp. And after every meal, you had to scrape your scraps into a bucket and do an ORT report so that they would know whose table had wasted the most and who hadn't. As its name suggests, it was a camp designed to help city kids learn about nature, experience nature, understand more about the world we share and our relationship to it. One of the culminating events of that week, after some trust had been built, was a night walk through the woods. Along with our counselors, we went out into the dark without flashlights. That's how I remember it, trusting in them to keep us safe and to lead us through. And I was absolutely terrified because I was, for the longest time, really quite afraid of the dark. I wanted the hall light on every night as a child. If I was the last one awake, I could not fall asleep. I would just stay up until morning. And when I was a teen, I would listen to music to try to like stave off that fear. And as I got older and I moved out of my parents' house, I would often watch TV or DVDs. The night and I were not good friends. It was nothing out of the ordinary, truly just your run-of-the-mill fear of the dark, exacerbated by an older brother who liked to tell stories of intruders and robbers. And if you combine that with a mind that doesn't always want to stop and maybe converge into anxiety and catastrophizing, and add all of that to a heart that doesn't actually trust that easily, you can imagine I was not excited about this walk in the woods. It required befriending the night and trusting the people around you. Not my thing, but it wasn't a choice. So I put on my maroon University of Chicago sweatshirt, the one my parents had gotten me. It's where they met. And I trudged out with my friends to head toward the woods. And here is what I remember from that experience. I remember that Jody, the counselor, held my hand. And I remember that my classmate, Ben, was wearing the same sweatshirt because his parents had also gone to the University of Chicago. We didn't coordinate, I swear. But of course, it led the other kids to be like teasing us, going, ooh, Sarah and Ben wearing the same sweatshirt. They were in love. It was ridiculous. I remember the fear. I remember the dark and the stars. And I remember that everything looked different and still the same in that way that happens at night. The ground was the same ground we had trod on the day before. The trees were the same trees we had identified and studied and drawn on paper. The paths were the same ones we'd walked that whole week. But now the world was lit only by the moon and the stars, and this other side of existence was visible. There was a magic in the darkness. I don't think I'm alone. And having grown up a bit afraid of the dark and of the night, that strikes me as a normal developmental stage as children separate more and more from their parents, but don't yet understand the world and its dangers and its safeties. I've watched my own kids go through phases of fear of the dark or loneliness at night. But it's also true that while we have this sort of natural response to the unknown, many of us have also grown up being taught a more clear and intentional association of darkness or blackness with negative qualities, like danger or untrustworthiness. We think of the darkness or blackness as shadowy or suspicious, imagining what scary things lurk around a corner, what secrets we can't perceive. And there are so many ways that we speak about darkness and about blackness as something to be shunned. Right? We have so many expressions: to be left in the dark, for example. There are other expressions that sort of do the reverse, right? The corollary, like a light bulb went on to capture the idea of enlightenment, or that something is pure as the driven snow, which carries the impression of whiteness as better, right? I actually did a little search on the internet to try to remind myself of all of the ways that we use these as metaphor in language. And I came across a piece on the Radical Copy Editor blog. So it's radicalcopyeditor.com. If you've never seen it, that's actually the blog of Alex Capitan. Alex works at the Unitarian Universalist Association and worked with us a couple of years ago on our trans inclusion course. I recommend absolutely checking out this blog. It's got some awesome material. This particular piece was titled Dark and Light, Practicing Balance and Countering Racism in Metaphors. And so looking at Alex's blog, I was reminded of the following expressions. We talk about people being in a black mood. We talk about the black sheep. We say that someone can be blacklisted, black male, dark times, the dark side. We use the word black-hearted, and all of those carry negative connotations, while things like white knight, white lie, white collar, white as snow, they carry positive associations. While a fear of the dark and night might be an appropriate developmental stage, and while we can understand what early pre-electricity humans might have had by way of concerns about the darkness, we've developed a whole system of metaphors that cast black, dark, night as scary and bad, and white, light, and day as moral and good. And this is extremely problematic, right? Language matters. Our words shape us, and perhaps even more importantly, they shape the children around us. And the reality is that we don't actually have to retain these systems of metaphors any more than we have to retain any system that props up racism. Alex quotes a piece by longtime Black UU religious educator, author, and leader Jackie James, who writes the following. We shape language and are shaped by it. In our culture, white is esteemed. It is heavenly, sun-like, clean, pure, immaculate, innocent, and beautiful. At the same time, black is evil, wicked, gloomy, depressing, angry, sullen. Ascribing negative and positive values to black and white enhances the institutionalization of this culture's racism. She goes on, let us acknowledge the negative connotations of whiteness. White things can be soft, vulnerable, pallid, and ashen. Light can be bleaching, enervating. Conversely, we must acknowledge that darkness has a redemptive character, that in darkness there is power and beauty. The dark nurtured and protected us before our birth. She writes, welcome darkness. Don't be afraid of it or deny it. Darkness brings relief from the sun, from scorching heat, from exhausting labor. Night signals permission to rest, to be with our loved ones, to conceive new life, to search our hearts, to remember our dreams. The dark of winter is a time of hibernation. Seeds grow in the dark, fertile earth. She finishes this way. The words black and dark don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. The words white and light don't need to be destroyed or ignored, only balanced and reclaimed in their wholeness. Imagine a world that had only light or only dark. We need both, dark and light, light and dark. Now, we've said this to each other before, that the dark of winter is when what will bloom in spring takes root, that the wet earth and the silence and darkness that lies below it is teeming with life, that babies grow in the dark of the womb. It is in darkness that life takes hold. We've said to each other before that the balance matters and that this time of year invites us into some balance. And I'll maintain this truth every winter, that there is beauty in the dark and quiet of this time, of any time. And I will say year after year that the darkness invites in magic in new ways, that it is a space of nurturing and growth. And this year I'm saying like a little bit more. I'm saying that it isn't enough to acknowledge that balance and try to cultivate it. We are also called to adjust our metaphors and our language, not discarding useful imagery and tools, but seeking balance even with our words. I can tell you from watching my own children that the metaphors are actually disturbingly insidious, that the metaphors work their way in, right? I'm still working on adjusting my own language in many, many ways, right? And I have seen my own children struggle with associations they know aren't right, but have somehow found their way into them. So if you think about when a kid draws a picture with a scary monster and they go instantly for black or gray, to draw that monster, right? Implicit color theory gives them this understanding. But we are called to actively, proactively change our language to better reflect our values. Embracing darkness and light, understanding the mutual work they do. And I do get that it's hard to unlearn phrases. There's still sometimes I will have something fly out of my mouth and I'll be like, oh man, that really underlined gender binaries, or wow, that included some weird violence I don't actually believe in, right? And I catch myself and I'll apologize to the person I'm speaking to, and I'll remind myself that the way I speak does actually tell people about my beliefs. It matters because it can confirm or challenge someone else's beliefs. And I remind myself that I can still learn to do things differently. We're capable of living in balance and expressing that balance in our words and our actions. We just have to try. The idea of this kind of balance is certainly not a new idea, right? It's certainly not a 21st century UU idea. It does take on a particular cast when contextualized within American history and culture in the myriad ways we've rejected balance. But the concept is ancient. We see it in stories and myths that explain the solstice and the change of seasons. We see it in the ancient Chinese concept of yin and yang, right? The inverse relationship between these two forces, often depicted as that circle with the two stylized half moons and the puncture of the other circle. As long as there has been day and night, the concept of balance has existed, but we have managed to lose that balance, I think, a little too much over time. The advent of technology, and I'm a Luddite, I have to confess. The advent of technology, first in the Industrial Revolution, then with electricity and light bulbs, and more recently with computers and technology, has changed the world entirely, right? That's a given. And while technology has offered many more leisure time that they didn't have before, and it's expanded the possibilities for light in which to enjoy these activities, it has also created in our Western culture an expectation of working all the time. If we can see in the night, why not also use the night to work? Our intense American focus on productivity has grown up alongside our capacity to stave off the darkness effectively. I can read my book late into the night because I have a light, but I can also be texted or emailed late into the night, right? We lost the ancient concepts of balance in our desire to control the world around us and to produce more and more. And those same capitalist impulses that drive the imbalance are rooted in the racism that created negative and positive associations with light and dark. So to change our language, be careful with our metaphors, to adjust our relationship to the darkness is actually to do a piece, small piece of the vast work of anti-racism and resistance. To take care with our words so that we reinforce the value of every single person, so that our words, instead of propping up racist beliefs, undermine them, making sure that those around us understand us as an ally. It's all worth the effort. To come to see the night as nurturing, a time for rest, and to insist on that boundary, eschewing a culture of constant access and constant work, that's a form of resistance against the combined machinery of racism and capitalism. It benefits us and everyone around us. For a long time, up until just a few years ago, I had what I called my sleeping glasses. I did not like to wake up in the middle of the night and not be able to see. So I would take off my new fashionable ones with the proper prescription and instead sleep in a pair of old wire-rimmed glasses that I wouldn't be upset if they broke, right? For literal decades, I did this. Those glasses were like 30 years old. Only recently have I been able to fall asleep with no music, no television, no sleeping glasses, just the darkness and the night. Even when everyone else in the house has fallen asleep. I've gotten there. It's taken a long time. The night contains power and beauty and depth, and each of us can work in our own ways to embrace the darkness in our lives and in our language, and to try to correct those ways we have been encouraged to fear or dislike it. We're trying very hard to give our children different associations with it. I don't want them to have sleeping glasses when they're 35, to give them the tools to embrace the night and lose their fear. We remind our children that they're safe, that the night is the time to relax and rejuvenate and grow. Let their brains rest and reinforce everything they've learned. That the night is there to nurture them, just as my body did when they were growing. We try to teach them that the unknown is full of possibility and they don't have to fear what they can't control. They know that it is in the night that they actually physically grow. And they know that they aren't actually alone in the night. It was so much easier to face my fears when that counselor held my hand and I felt the kinship of wearing the same sweatshirt as Ben. Companions on the journey help us be less afraid. We can feel that companionship even when we sleep alone, even when we live alone, because we can cultivate in ourselves a sense of oneness with humanity and with this earth and with our own heart that helps us remember our wholeness. And in our wholeness, we are not alone. We can cultivate a sense of groundedness that makes us less afraid. When we're less afraid, we can face change and our inherent lack of control with more equanimity. When we're less afraid, we are empowered to find balance even when it's hard. When we're less afraid, we can hear another's call to adjust our speech or our thinking, and we can answer that call rather than resist. When we're less afraid, we can listen to ourselves, to the still small voice, to hear what moves us, what feeds us, what makes us come alive. When we're less afraid, we can generously and openly offer our gifts to the world, whispering to the dark and knowing that it is there that things grow. May this season of waiting be a season of courage. May we embrace the dark and the night in words and actions. May we offer of ourselves in this time, sharing our gifts with the world. May we know the joy of wholeness and groundedness, and may we remember the truth that all is holy, dark and light, light and dark. So may it be.